The wind moves restlessly across the wide plain of Vitoria, whispering through the dry grass like a sigh from another age. The hills are quiet now, the rivers gentle, yet 2 centuries ago this same valley roared with the sound of empire dying. Imagine it. June 21st, 1813, a dawn thick with dust and heat. The French army, bloated with plunder and pride, stands between Arthur Wellesley's allied host and the liberation of Spain. Among the ranks, Corporal Edward Markham, veteran of Talavera and Salamanca, stands once more at the edge of history. His uniform is faded, his musket scarred, but his eyes are sharp. He has seen the rise and fall of men and nations, and now, as the drums begin to roll, he senses an ending. Not just a battle, not just another victory, but the moment when the great shadow of Napoleon begins to break. He looks across the valley and whispers to himself, "If this is the end, let it be seen by the sun." The wind carries the first notes of the French drums deep, hollow, inevitable. The day the empire crumbled has begun. By 1813, the Peninsular War had raged for 5 long, merciless years. Spain was a scarred land, villages burned, churches looted, its people exhausted. Britain's redcoats had bled across the Iberian plains, retreating, advancing, retreating again. But something had changed. Wellington, now a hardened commander, elevated to Marquis of Wellington, was no longer fighting to survive. He was fighting to end it. Behind him marched a coalition forged from exhaustion and defiance. British regulars, Portuguese veterans, and the ragged but resilient remnants of Spain's armies. They had chased the French for months, through mountains, valleys, and broken towns, driving them north toward the Basque Country. Each mile brought the French closer to the border, and to the reckoning they had tried to outrun. To the men like Edward Markham, this campaign felt different. The constant retreats were gone. The confidence had returned. The soldiers spoke quietly, almost reverently, of what was coming. "We'll end it at Vitoria," someone whispered by the campfire. "We'll drive them out for good." The sky above Spain burned gold at dusk, and the sound of distant guns was a heartbeat that would not stop. Across the valley, the French army under Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's elder brother and puppet king of Spain, prepared for the inevitable. It was an army more burdened than commanded. Tens of thousands of wagons clogged the roads, chests of stolen gold, priceless paintings ripped from Spanish churches, jewels, silks, and silver plate. Behind those wagons, weary soldiers tried to form ranks. Their morale, once the pride of Europe, now sagged beneath hunger, fatigue, and the bitter knowledge that their emperor's star was fading. Marshal Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, once brilliant, now sick and weary, argued with Joseph daily. They fought not about tactics, but about treasure, about how much could be saved and who would carry the blame. "The emperor commands we hold Spain," Joseph snapped. "Then let him come and hold it himself," Jourdan replied. That single line summed up the spirit of Vitoria, an empire too vast, too proud, and now too broken to hold itself together. The French soldiers could hear the rumor on the wind. Wellington was coming, and he was coming with fire. In early June, Wellington's army began its final march, 80,000 men moving like a single living tide. 4 columns advanced through the mountains of northern Spain, winding along narrow passes and roaring rivers. Rain fell, then sun, then dust. The redcoats trudged on, their boots soaked, their uniforms stiff with grime. The Portuguese troops, wiry and sunburnt, kept pace. Spanish cavalry scouted ahead, their lances glinting in the dawn. Wellington had planned it perfectly. His troops would strike the French from 4 directions, converging on the plains of Vitoria like a closing fist. Corporal Edward Markham marched with the 48th Foot. His face was lined, his eyes hollowed by years of war, but within him burned a grim resolve. "We've marched through hell," he muttered, "and now we'll watch it burn." On June 20th, they crested the last ridge, and below them lay the valley of Vitoria. It was a rich, wide basin, surrounded by hills and cut by the winding Zadora River. In the center lay the town, its church towers glinting in the sun, and beyond it, the French army stretched in long, wavering lines. Edward's captain lowered his spyglass and said quietly, "They're trapped, boys. They just don't know it yet." That night the camp was silent. Men cleaned muskets, sharpened bayonets, and stared toward the horizon where the fires of the French camps flickered like dying stars. The dawn broke gray and heavy. Mist clung to the river banks, and the air carried the faint metallic scent of gunpowder. At 6 o'clock, the first guns spoke. The thunder rolled across the valley. The Allied attack had begun. From the west, Hill's corps moved along the southern road. From the north, Graham's columns pushed across the Zadora, cutting off the French escape. In the center, Wellington himself directed the assault, calm, methodical, his voice firm as stone. The French, caught off guard, scrambled to form their lines. Drums beat, officers shouted, and across the plain, smoke began to rise. Edward's battalion advanced through wheat fields, the stalks bending underfoot. The first volleys tore the air, musket balls hissing like hornets, cannon smoke blotting out the sun. He saw men fall beside him without sound, their bodies twisting as if struck by invisible hands. Still he marched, his musket leveled, his throat raw with powder and fear. The French fought hard, but confusion ruled their ranks. Jourdan, ill and exhausted, could barely command. Joseph tried to direct from a hilltop, his carriage surrounded by wagons piled with loot. Everywhere the roads were choked, by treasure, by guns, by dying men. "They're running," someone shouted. "No, they're collapsing." By midday, the French center began to crumble. Allied troops surged forward, bayonets flashing. The valley became a storm of sound, gunfire, drums, the shriek of cannon shot tearing through the air. Edward reached a low stone wall, dropped behind it, and reloaded. His hands shook. Sweat and powder streaked his face. He looked out and saw a sight he'd never forget. French soldiers abandoning their posts to loot the very wagons they were meant to protect. Gold and silver spilled into the mud. A man grabbed a painting and was cut down where he stood. Empire was devouring itself. By afternoon, the battle turned into rout. The French fell back toward the town, their formations shattered. Wellington's guns poured fire into the chaos, and the redcoats surged forward with cold, unstoppable momentum. Markham's ears rang, his lungs burned, but he pressed on, step by step. Through smoke and screams, he could hear a single thought echo in his mind. So this is how an empire dies. By evening, Vitoria was no longer a battlefield. It was a catastrophe. The French army, once proud and disciplined, dissolved into panic. Officers threw down swords, men abandoned their colors, and the roads clogged with the debris of empire. Joseph Bonaparte fled in his carriage, his crown stuffed into a chest beside stolen treasure. Behind him, wagons overturned and caught fire. Paintings from Madrid's royal palaces, Goya, Velázquez, Murillo, burned in the ditches. Edward Markham stumbled through the wreckage. He saw soldiers prying gold from chests, others trying to lift wounded comrades from beneath broken wheels. Horses screamed, cannon smoke hung low, and the sun set red as blood. The stench of powder and flesh filled the valley. When at last the guns fell silent, Vitoria lay broken, a monument not to victory, but to the corruption of war itself. Wellington stood on a ridge surveying the field. An aide approached and saluted. "The French are gone, sir." Wellington nodded. "Then Spain is free." But in his eyes there was no triumph, only exhaustion. The next morning the fields were quiet but for the crows. Over 8,000 men lay dead or wounded. The air was thick with the smell of blood and burnt powder. The French had lost everything, not only their loot and artillery, but their hold on Spain itself. Napoleon's brother Joseph had barely escaped capture. His empire in Spain had collapsed in a single day. Wellington wrote home, "The French are driven from Spain. The war, I think, is over." It was not, but the tide had turned forever. Markham wandered among the ruins. He found a broken musket, a child's toy, a torn letter, fragments of lives consumed by history. He sat down beside a stream, washed the blood from his hands, and whispered, "We've won, but look what we've become." 2 centuries later, the fields of Vitoria are silent again. The roads are paved, the farms rebuilt. But if you walk there at dusk, when the wind turns cool and the sky glows faint, you can still feel the weight of that day. Every hill, every stream, every whisper of the breeze carries a memory. Of redcoats standing in line, of French soldiers clutching their colors, of an empire collapsing under its own greed. Vitoria was not just a victory, it was a warning. That when empires chase glory too far, they often meet themselves at the edge of ruin. Edward Markham survived the war. He went home to a country, already forgetting what it had asked of him. But in his dreams, he always returned to that valley, where the sun burned gold on cannon barrels, and where men learned that power, like pride, always bleeds. "History remembers the victors," he once wrote. "But the land remembers the fallen." And as we stand here, centuries later, the echoes of Vitoria still linger. The battle that broke Napoleon's power in Spain, the day an empire stumbled beneath its own weight. When we walk these quiet fields, we're not just walking history. We're walking the cost of ambition, of loyalty, of empire itself. If you felt the weight of this story, the courage, the tragedy, the ghosts, then help keep their memory alive. Like this video, share it with those who love forgotten history, and subscribe for more journeys through the shadows of the Victorian and Napoleonic world. Because history isn't just in the past, it's beneath our feet, waiting for us to listen. Until next time, walk carefully through history. The ground remembers.